Geoff Pearce is the Deputy Chief Executive of Swan Housing Association, which operates in East London and in Essex and manages over 11,000 homes with a development pipeline of some 8,000 and an aim to deliver a further 10,000 by 2027. Swan has its own in-house developer, New Living, which is delivering modular housing built in its own factory under the New Build brand. So, Geoff, can you give me an update on how things are going for you 6 months into the pandemic in terms of marketplace and your development pipeline?
It's been an interesting 6 months and quite difficult, I suppose, to adapt to new ways of working. And it looks like we're going to have to continue working in some interesting and odd ways for the next, well, at least 6 months or foreseeable short-term future. So I suppose just reflecting back on the 6 months, the first 6 months, the first few weeks were very unusual, and that was all about kind of having a daily sort of a daily change in outlook and seeing that government rules seemed to be changing from day to day. New guidance was being issued very, very frequently. That seems to have calmed down a bit now, and we, particularly on our construction sites and in our modular housing factory that you've already mentioned, we now seem to be operating reasonably well, quite close to sort of full output and productivity. So we've adapted to those things, and I think also on the sales side, our sales and marketing people have managed to continue to work throughout, although show homes, etc., were closed for a while, and we've done quite well actually in recent times with reservations. But I think it's as a lot of market commentators will tell you, it's hard to know how much of that is a kind of a short-term rebound as a result of a period of lockdown, and then the summer and the spring and people feeling a bit more optimistic, and how long that's going to last for. So we're watching the housing market kind of closely with interest, really. Be interesting to see the impact of Brexit on the housing market as well. At the moment, we still don't have a deal as such, but also watching to what extent the current market conditions are being supported by the stamp duty holiday, and also the economic stimulus that's been put into COVID, and what happens with unemployment, etc., when that stops, will definitely start to impact, I believe, on the housing market. So for housing associations, it's all about stress testing and understanding what the impact will be in certain scenarios on your business plan, and looking at other ways of doing things. So whilst we continue to have a pipeline of housing for sale, we're also looking at models for diversifying that for change in tenure, and thinking about what you would do in the event of a slowdown. And very, very early on, we did some scenario analysis around both a short-term V-shaped recession, and then a longer-term kind of L-shaped or U-shaped recession, which puts us in good stead. So we kind of understand what the impact on our business of both of those things would be, and we've got plans that will enable us to manage through in the event that the sales market flattens. And as a housing association, selling homes, the most significant thing that could happen to us is a complete slowdown or stop in private market sales, rather than perhaps a drop in values. We haven't seen the drop in values to date, by the way. In fact, quite the opposite in some cases, seen values rising, particularly where we've got houses in more suburban areas or out of London.
So the government is increasing its focus on modern methods of construction, and as I said, you've been in the forefront of that shift in the way housing is delivered. How are you finding that at the moment?
Well, I think the big news is that last week we signed up a lease on a second factory facility. So At the moment, we have around 80,000 square feet of space in Basildon and Essex, and we've just entered a lease for a space that's about 130,000 square feet, immediately opposite that same factory. So we're more than doubling our capacity for output. So I think that kind of speaks volumes about our confidence and commitment to building modular housing. To date, we've been building using cross-laminated timber as the main structural component of our modular housing. The new factory will also produce light gauge steel and steel framed modular housing, so we'll be able to continue to provide modular housing in higher blocks following the government's ban on combustible materials in buildings over 18 metres. So we've found through the pandemic, we've been able to continue to manufacture, we've been able to have maintained safe working distancing, safe social distancing within our factory. We've been able to keep a full complement of staff actually employed, and through doing simple things like staggering breaks and issuing PPE and ensuring that we redesign our work processes so people can stay apart. We've managed to keep going all the way through, even when our construction sites have closed for a while. I think we are learning a lot around modular housing, and it's been a continuous learning curve from the very start. And I think the biggest takeaway for us really has been about how we work with our architects and engineers to truly design for manufacture. And I think it's fair to say that probably 70% of issues and delays in our modular housing manufacture have occurred because of design issues, I suppose you would say, without being critical of the designers. It's about having that joined up approach so that we design things that are capable of being manufactured efficiently and whilst maintaining productivity in the factory. We've had quite a few examples where that hasn't always been the case, but with every house type and every apartment type that we build, we learn a bit more, and it's a continually evolving process. We've brought in our own in-house architectural team based in the factory, so that we don't have to keep going through the learning curve with the detailed elements of the design, using external architects to deal with the external look and feel of buildings and the conceptual design, if you like, and that seems to be paying dividends. I think the other thing about modular housing that's been, I guess, challenging at times has also been the education of the site teams, and we've had a few iterations of how we process that. We now directly employ the installation team, and effectively the modules are locked, so that only the factory's installation team have access to them for the installation process, and that's kind of removed a lot of some of the issues that we had around damage being caused to modules. So it's just a different way of working. A lot more time up front, a lot more planning up front, but then much less time on site.
Now, you mentioned that you were seeing a demand for more suburban housing. So what impact do you think COVID-19 is going to have in the longer term? Not just the design of homes, but also local areas and how to accommodate greater home working and people wanting more space both inside and outside?
Certainly in the short term, that the impact particularly around having more access to open space, and that has definitely seen that impact. And I think you can see that again in some of the commentary from the big agents and the RICS around the increase in transactions in countryside homes. And I think what I suppose the longer term impact of COVID is that for most employers, they now can see that it is possible for people to work productively from home, and that is a sensible way of working. And so I think for a lot of people, they will see their employers will change their policies, that they will be able to work from home 2 to 3 days a week, perhaps, or that means that the commute becomes less of an issue if you're only doing it a couple of times a week. And people will, I think, choose to live further away from work, or rather work won't become the key driver for where you choose to call your home. So I do think that could be a long-term shift and a long-term impact. I think it was one that was perhaps going to come at some point in the future anyway, but it's been accelerated through COVID. Yeah, it is hard to know how many of these changes are permanent, and to what degree people will want to return to normal in the future. And I would say that we are social animals, human beings, and we will want to continue to go to a place of work. And I certainly miss going into the office and meeting people. And I think this is going to have a real impact potentially on some of our less experienced staff who won't be getting that day-to-day interaction and that learning on the job that I certainly remember all those years ago going through. And I learned a lot as I was developing, simply by watching other people or by the casual chats in the workplace kitchen. And I don't think it's possible to effectively work permanently from home. So I think people will still have to consider the commute and going into work, but I think it becomes less important perhaps in the future than it has been in the past, and we might see more people living away from the city. I think it's also perhaps forced us to start to think again about design. I suppose I've been around in sort of housing and development for too longer than I care to remember. And we go through cycles of discussing design and then discussing purely delivery and pace and the technical aspects of construction, for instance. But there's another, I think I can see a conversation around design and good quality design of homes and internal layouts, not just design of places, although there is quite a lot of that going on as well. And I think I've spoken to quite a few designers, architects that are starting to think about how the home of the future will need to work, and moving away from some of the standardized open plan arrangements that we've seen become particularly fashionable, I suppose, over the last 10 years.
You've got quite a chunky pipeline, but who do you think is going to be delivering the homes that London needs post-COVID? Local authorities doing a little bit more, housing associations very active. There's obviously quite a lot of pressure from the London plan to deliver more small sites. Where do you see the numbers coming from?
Well, I think it clearly will be massively impacted upon by the shape of the economy and the housing market. In the past, housing associations have been able to operate counter-cyclically. When there's been a recession, housing associations have been able to some degree, fill in the gaps through producing more affordable housing. There is a sort of slight safe caveat to that at the moment, which is that housing associations have also got a huge number of other priorities, in particular around building safety, and many housing associations have quite significant programs of expenditure on retrofitting existing blocks and buildings, and so don't necessarily have the capacity, either financially or organisationally, to take on a large scale development program. And the other thing I think that's coming, although it's not yet here, it will be the need to invest in our existing homes to to make them greener, to bring them up to reduce their carbon emissions. And I think that's something that housing associations, again, are increasingly becoming aware of. And our new corporate strategy has the planet and our existing homes as two of the key components of that, whereas perhaps in previous years, those would have been seen more as business as usual kind of functions within the company, but we were seeing those as primary focus. So that will take some capacity out of the system. In a recession, I think the larger house builders will struggle. Will not necessarily want to invest in much market housing. You could see a further increase in build to rent if interest rates remain at their very, very low rate and gilts remain a low rate. You could see more institutional investment coming into build to rent, but also into affordable housing. We're already seeing the likes of LNG investing heavily in affordable housing, and there's quite a lot of capacity in that sector, I think, to invest in housing. And then local authorities will have to, if they are going to do more, will have to invest in capacity, in their own skills and capacity to do that. But I think as ever in London, it's going to be a mix of all. SMEs, I think, might find it quite difficult. I think they may find it difficult to raise development finance again if finance becomes more constrained as a recession starts to bite. But I expect housing associations will continue to look to deliver large programs of mixed tenure housing. I suspect local authorities will be continuing to try to build their programs, and I can see, as I said, the build to let, build to rent market expanding further, and certainly for-profit RPs starting to have a much bigger impact in the future on delivery.
Thank you, Geoff, for your insights into housing market, housing associations, and modern methods of construction. So very nice to hear from you. I look forward to seeing you in the flesh soon.
Let's keep our fingers crossed.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Okay.